Hey, Beacon, welcome back to your Bounce Back Blueprint Community podcast. I'm your Bounce Back guide, Tiffany Huff Struthers. So glad to have you back here with me in the place to be. If this is your first time joining us, what you want to know about the Bounce Back Blueprint Community podcast is that it is exactly where you need to be if you are a woman of faith who has experienced a setback that you know God has called you to share, to make impact and income, and you need a safe space, some covenant connections, and a guide to do the journey with you. And I am your guide. The community is full of other dynamic women like you who you can get connected to, and the information to do so is in the show notes. This week, I am recording from my backyard. Hopefully, nature doesn't consume our space, but my backyard has become my place of refuge, my safe space as we continue through this season of quarantining and pandemics, plural. So I thought that this morning was a great morning to come back here and sit under the umbrella and just enjoy the breeze and also give you all a little taste of the natural elements in the background. And also to both remind and encourage you in this season to give yourself permission to prioritize making and finding sacred spaces for you where you can be, even in the midst of everything that is going on, which I talked a little bit about in the episode Peace in the Midst of Panic. If you haven't listened, I encourage you to go and check it out. Have you had the opportunity to listen to the She's Free Week interviews? If you haven't, let me tell you, you have certainly missed out on several opportunities to literally get the keys, the jewels, the gems necessary to begin the journey of setting yourself free. And all of those episodes, thankfully, are still available for you to tune into and listen to. So I encourage you to listen to those as well. I know I'm encouraging you to listen to a lot. So I will say that since we are coming up on the date on the calendar for Independence Day, and a lot of us will have days or time off, set some time aside for yourself and give yourself permission to just tune in and bask in all of the greatness that has been being shared to support, challenge, and encourage you on your bounce back journey. So, before we dig into this week's episode, I want to share a review. And this week's review says, "A dose of what you need." Tiffany is an amazing host. I love this podcast because it is not only motivational, but it gives practical steps for me to change my life. I love her perspective on starting the mornings off right, and I'm always excited to hear the new episode when it pops up. And that review was left by Bree of BC Works. Thank you so much, Bree. She is my P2P sister, and I appreciate her taking the time to tune in and leave the review. And if you haven't left a review already, then that is something that I'm going to challenge you to do. And of course, if you leave a review, I will make it my business to read a review every week. So this week we are tuning in to the breakthrough. And I decided to share about this week for a couple of reasons. The first is in my most recent therapy session. And yes, sis, if you are not already in therapy, I encourage you to find a therapist and get into it. So in my most recent therapy session, I was sharing with my therapist about how I recognize in this season a reflection and putting my head down, which I talked about in another episode, but just being in a space of completely surrendering and being open to what God has for me in this season. And of course, reflecting consistently as I move through this season, I've recognized how so many of my relationships and the dynamics of a lot of my relationships have shifted. And not saying that this is because of the pandemic, right? I don't want you to hear me saying that I'm in or heavily engaged in the cancel culture, because that is not the case at all. What I am saying, though, is that in this season of intentionally reflecting and purposefully really considering what it means for me to have unshakable joy in this season, I have been made even more aware of the shifts in my relationships. And in some cases, it's disheartening, right? On one hand, it's like, I know that I'm growing and certain things are no longer for me, right? But on the other hand, I am still grieving the connection that was related to those relationships that are shifting. And my therapist reminded me of a popular poem that you may be familiar with. It is often said to be written by an unknown person, and that is the poem A Reason, a Season, and a Lifetime. And I don't want to read the poem to you in its entirety, but I do want to give you a little bit of a gist of what the poem is about. And you may be familiar with, the phrase like people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime, right? And what this poem says is that when someone is in your life for a reason, it is usually to meet a need you have expressed outwardly or inwardly, right? When someone is in your life for a season, it is because your turn has come to share, grow, or learn. And when someone is in your life for a lifetime, they are teaching you lifetime lessons, and those things you must build upon in order to have a solid emotional foundation. And again, I was very familiar with this poem, very familiar with the phrase, and recognized that over the past several years, as I have been evolving and growing and making changes, and God has continued to prune me, that, the evolution of the reason, season, lifetime relationships has consistently been taking place on my journey. But in this season, right here, right now, what I recognize is that it is happening at a larger or at a greater, in a greater way. It is happening more holistically, I should say. Not only is it personal relationships, there are some professional positions and relationships, some leadership positions and relationships, even spiritually, there have been some relationships that in this season, God has made expressly clear for me are coming to an end or are shifting, right? And there are some days when I'm just like, wow, what's left? Because, with the pandemic, there's so much we aren't able to do, right? So many places we aren't able to go. And now it's like, wow, there are so many relationships that have shifted, right? And again, I'm not saying that I don't have any friends, because I do have an awesome group of friends that are always there and have been there for a while. Some of them are new, some of them are more like forever friends. But I recognize that in this season of putting my head down and of reflecting and of bouncing back from certain things and shifting in my business and everything, that there has been a lot of change, and there is still more change that God is preparing me to make in those relationships. And the reason is because He's changing me. And so when my therapist reminded me of that poem, it was helpful for me to shift my perspective and realize that the common denominator in all of these relationships and shifts and changes in seasons and everything is me. And a lot of times when someone points out that we are the common denominator in a situation, it is to point out something problematic within us. But I want to encourage you, if you feel like you are in a space like this and you are doing some real reflection and you are really pursuing God and being obedient and focused on what He has for you, that you being the common denominator is not always problematic, right? I want you to remember that pruning, although in the midst of it, it often feels like it is not punishment. Pruning is preparation, and preparation is necessary before elevation. And so when things feel like they are breaking down, it is my firm belief that it is preparation and or pruning for breakthrough. And I feel like in this season, I am in a space of breakthrough. And that leads to the second reason why this episode is the breakthrough. And it's because I do Q&A Tuesday on Instagram. Not sure if you're familiar. If you're not following me, you need to be. Um, so this week's Q&A Tuesday question was, what one word would you use to describe the first half of 2020, as we are wrapping up the first half of the year, as we are wrapping up the second quarter of the year? What one word would you use to describe the year? And for me, the word was breakthrough. And if you listen to my birthday episode, then you know my word for 2020 is unshakable, right? And I believe that in the first half of this year, God has been really stretching me in a way that He had to shake some of the foundation, right? He had to shake some things within me and around me. He had to prune a lot so that in the second half of this year, He can begin to rebuild for that unshakable foundation, right? And so when something is shaken up, when something is being demolished, it feels like a breakdown, a tearing down, right? But the other thing that happens when the ground is demolished, when the ground is opening up, there is also room for breakthrough, right? When a plant starts to grow, it breaks through the ground. Yes, it might create a hole in the ground, but that hole is necessary for the breakthrough. And so I want to encourage you to shift your perspective and look at the clarity that you receive when you have a breakthrough, especially when it is following a season or a time or an incident of breakdown, right? That's why clarity is cornerstone number one of the bounce back blueprint, because it's so important that you recognize the power of clarity. And for me, in this season of shifts and dynamics and changes and relationships and the season, reason, lifetime perspective becoming so much more clear, I recognize that the two, I should say, relationships that are even more important for me as I put my head down, as I prepare for unshakable joy, as I pursue unshakable joy, the two relationships that are so important for me to have said clarity are my relationship with myself and, of course, my relationship with God, right? That clarity comes through spending time with God, so that in doing so, I am more informed about who He created me to be as I spend time with myself. And I can have the perspective that, again, me being the common denominator is not a problem. It's not punishment. It's powerful. And I want to encourage and challenge you to create the time and the space for you to gain that clarity, for you to understand, grab hold of, and honestly express gratitude for the breakthroughs that you are having in this season, even when they are following or in between one or a few breakthroughs, right? Even when there is something that happens, you get a breakthrough, and then something else happens, the breakthrough is not diminished as a result of that, right? So I want to challenge you to really consider two questions. And these are two questions that I share often with the community, also with the clients that I work with as they are preparing to share their stories and building their voices as victors. Two questions that are always very important for you to understand and fully embrace clarity. And the breakthroughs that follow breakdowns are these. Number one, what have I learned from said breakdown, setback, or experience, right? A lot of times we spend way too much time questioning why. Why is this happening? Why me, God? Why not? And instead, we should be asking, or we have the opportunity and could be asking, what? What did I learn? What am I taking away from this experience? What does God intend for me to do? How might He want me to use this experience, right? So, after you ask yourself, what have I learned from this experience? Then the second question is, how has this experience changed me? How have I transformed as a result of this experience? And I'm going to be very, very clear about this truth. And that truth is that being able to get the entirety of your breakthrough, being able to fully experience the power of said clarity as you work through, write through, journal through, and are reflecting and answering those questions for yourselves, in order for you to really fully embrace the answer to those questions and be able to use those answers to make an impact and an income, you have to be being intentional about the time you spend with God and the time that you spend with yourself to get that clarity. Because if you don't know, or you aren't clear, or you aren't consistently connected to your source, then it's very challenging for you to know the plan that He has for you. And if you don't know the plan that He has for you, then it's going to be very challenging for you to interpret your breakthrough. It's going to be very challenging for you to see that some opportunities are presented as obstacles, right? To the blind eye when you don't have the clarity. But when you have clarity, right? When you know who you are, when you know whose you are, and when you are consistently connected to your source, then you have a perspective that is going to bring power to and empower you through said breakdown to that breakthrough. And hopefully, you are hearing my heart in this, because I know so well for myself for this to be true. And so, after my therapy session, I took some time and I was like, you know what? I need to get even more committed, even more engaged with my power morning ritual, because it is through my power morning ritual that I am, you know, building, gaining, investing in even more intimacy in my relationship with God. And also, through that time with Him, I am able to really embrace, understand, and celebrate the woman that I am becoming in this season. All of the work that is necessary for me to have that unshakable joy. And I know that joy is one of the fruits of the spirit, and so it is not only my birthright, but it is yours as well. And I want to, as your guide, be integral in your ability to recognize, embrace, and protect the space that you are creating for building and developing, reigniting for some of you, that intimacy with God, and that time to prioritize yourself as a woman of God, as a beacon who is called to do amazing work in this world. And so what I have decided is that I am going to share with you what I've learned, and of course what I'm still learning, even as your bounce back guide, about the power of clarity. And specifically, I am hosting a free training, if you will, on Tuesday, July 14th, called the Currency of Clarity. Yes, the Currency of Clarity, because what I know for sure is that people really underestimate the power of clarity. People don't understand how clarity impacts your coin. Let's just be real. And what I mean by that is, of course, on this journey, right, as you are bouncing back from whatever setback or breakdown or experience, right? If God is calling you, as I know He is calling the beacons that are assigned to me as a bounce back guide, to use said experience as you share your story to make an impact and an income, if you aren't connected with Him fully, then your currency is going to be negatively impacted by your lack of clarity. And so I want you to right now click the link in the show notes and get signed up to join myself and other beacons in the Bounce Back Blueprint community for this, self-care session. Really is what it will be. But it will be training. You will learn, and you will begin to set yourself free. You will begin to have a shift where you can see that in this season, even with all you are growing through, all that God has called you to do, it is a season of a breakthrough, and it is also a season of preparation, right? It's not punishment. All of these things, all of these perspective shifts are necessary in order for you to make the impact and income and to be and to do all that God has called you to. So I really look forward to you joining me. I am super excited about having this conversation Tuesday, July 14th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can grab the link in the show notes to sign up. I promise you will be blessed by it. And of course, if you haven't already, I would love it if you would take a moment or two and invest into the podcast, a little bit of the blessing that the podcast has given you, and just leave a review. And by doing so, know that you are creating the opportunity and space for a beacon just like you to find this community, get connected, and begin to understand and embrace the currency of clarity. Takes less than 2 minutes to leave a review. So please do. And of course, until next time, you know to be true that God is not going to play you. But if you refuse to invest in the intimacy necessary for your relationship with Him to get the clarity that He has intended for you, sis, you're playing yourself.